The Imperium of Man is a sprawling galactic empire protected by a military unlike any seen before. Millions of worlds and trillions of people are united in their faith to the God Emperor and their will to persevere through the horrors of the grim darkness of the 41st millennium. While the Space Marines of the Adeptus Astartes are seen as the poster child of the Imperium, they are but a very small part in a much larger machine. The Astartes are a force to be reckoned with for sure, but they aren't the everyday defenders of the Emperor's realm. Enter the Astra Militarum, more commonly known as the Imperial Guard. These men and women hail from the countless worlds of the Imperium, often conscripted to serve within the ranks of the largest army the galaxy has ever seen, and stands as the bulwark against the darkness. We're going to talk about these brave souls, the iterations of the Imperial Guard pre- and post-heresy, and a little bit about how the institution functions and how normal folks like you and I are the real heroes in the far future. Welcome back to Starhammer. The combat doctrine of the Imperial Guard is a very simple one. Throw enough bodies at an enemy and enough rounds downrange, and eventually you'll achieve victory. Through overwhelming firepower provided by the Guard's range of heavy tanks and artillery cannons, combined with oppressive amounts of laser rifle fire from regiment upon regiment of infantry soldiers. It is these infantrymen that form the backbone of the Guard. Regiments face down the most horrifying threats in the galaxy with laser and bayonet, and most of them won't see their first year of service, and even more won't see their next day of service. Despite everyone essentially being reduced to a statistic, every single soldier who takes a stand against the enemies of humanity is a hero in their own right. For without the near limitless legions of the Astra Militarum, the light of humanity may have been extinguished long ago. The origins of this storied institution date back to the Unification Wars waged long ago on Terra. Back in the day, humanity had colonized the stars before, but they were all cut off from each other due to massive warp storms that made interstellar travel and communication impossible. Many of these worlds devolved into little more than warring tribals battling for territory and survival, and Earth was no different. Enter the Emperor of Mankind. His goal was to unite the techno-barbarian clans into a unified world government and use Terra as the pushing point for his reunification of all humanity scattered among the stars, later known as the Great Crusade. To pull this off, however, the Emperor would need an army, the likes of which hadn't been seen on Terra in many, many years. The Emperor proceeded to create an army of mildly enhanced warriors called Genos. These warriors were important in the sense that they served as the origin for the much more genetically modified Thunder Warriors, which were then the predecessors to the legendary Astartes Space Marines. Anyway, once Terra was united and the Great Crusade began, the Emperor, his Primarchs, and their Space Marines began the long and often bloody work of bringing worlds into Imperial compliance. That being said, the powers that be and their Space Marines couldn't be everywhere at once. Legions couldn't stay behind to ensure worlds paid the Imperial tithe, so the Emperor decreed the creation of the Imperial Army. Typically made up of people indigenous to these recently conquered worlds, they served as a peacekeeping force. Based on the world population, the Imperium would determine how many bodies and war materials each world would contribute to the crusade. Some worlds would only supply maybe 100 able-bodied people a year, while the jam-packed hive worlds would be commanded to contribute thousands or even millions. As the demands of the Emperor's Crusade increased, more and more regiments were pulled off-world to fight on the front lines alongside the Emperor and his Space Marines. At the outbreak of the Horus-heresy, half the Space Marine legions betrayed the Emperor for the cause of chaos. The Imperial Army wasn't immune to Horus's influence either. Compelled by fear, ambition, loyalty, or a combination of the three, millions upon millions of soldiers turned against the Imperium with their Astartes commanders. Just imagine that. Traitor Astartes are bad enough, but countless regular soldiers backing them up? It really puts into perspective the effectiveness of the traitor forces as they blew through Imperial space straight to the Imperial Palace itself. But we all know how the Horus Heresy ended. I won't get into that here. The Traitor Guard fled into the Eye of Terror with their corrupted masters, and like almost every institution after the heresy, the Imperial Army was restructured and reorganized. Steps had to be taken to ensure that the regular human warriors of the Imperium could never rise up in such numbers again. Ultramarines Primarch and Lord Commander Robuta Guilliman disbanded the Imperial Army and the ties to the Armada Imperialis, the navy that they had worked so closely with and that had helped the traitors rain fire and death upon the Emperor's realm, was permanently severed. In its place, the Astra Militarum was born. As the new Navis Imperialis waged wars in the depths of space, all ground operations would be conducted by the Astra Militarum. In order to ensure loyalty, the Officio Prefectus was created to train officers that would be absolutely loyal and incorruptible. Should they find cowardice or malcontent within their ranks, these commissars had full authority and encouragement to publicly execute those responsible. Guilliman's reforms made the Astra Militarum a codependent organization. No longer would they be a self-sufficient and trusted cog in the Emperor's war machine, but one that was held under a microscope for disloyalty and could no longer launch campaigns without the express permission of the powers that be on Terra. Despite all of that, the Imperial Guard went on to become a celebrated and dedicated fighting force for the Emperor. Though engaged in literal countless battles that may never go on record, the men and women who served were lauded as heroes when tales of their triumphs and desperate last stands did reach the ears of the regiment's homeworld and the wider Imperium. The Guard not only served as the brutal hammer of the Emperor, but served as a force that would unite billions from vastly different cultures under a common goal. Aided by the Adeptus Ministerium, state church of the Imperial cult, and the Adeptus Mechanicus and their tech priests, the Guard waged eternal war across the stars and even helped these other organizations grow their own numbers as well. Some of the more famous engagements involving the Guard were the defense of Ultramar in the First Tarmatic War, the Armageddon Wars, and the Damocles Gulf Crusade against the budding Tau Empire. But perhaps the most famous and well-remembered of these battles took place during the 13th Black Crusade with the fall of Cadia. Cadia was a fortress world situated essentially right on top of the Eye of Terror. It had long stood as a beacon of defiance against the forces of chaos. Countless numbers of these forces, from demons to heretic Astartes, had tried to take Cadia and failed, always being pushed back by the Imperial Guard regiment stationed there. But when Abaddon launched his 13th Black Crusade, he had a number of traitor forces not seen since the Horus Heresy, and the game changed. Abaddon ordered wave after wave of his limitless forces at the planet. Yet, even knowing the odds were so stacked against them, the Guard never ceased in its relentless defense. For every inch of ground gained, the traitor forces paid for it in a river of blood. Eventually, Abaddon sent an ancient blackstone fortress plunging through Cadia's atmosphere in an attempt to utterly obliterate the planet and its staunch protectors. Lord Castellan Ursakar Creed, the governor of Cadia, and his men stayed behind in order to evacuate as many of the defenders as possible. Of the billions that defended Cadia, barely 3 million of them made it off-world, and the Lord Castellan wasn't one of them. The gargantuan void ships shattered the planet upon impact. The ancient Necron pylons that had long kept the warp from taking Cadia were no more, and the Immaterium greedily swallowed up the world that had defied it for so long. Though Cadia was lost, the rallying cry of Cadia stands echoes through eternity and throughout the Imperial Guard, and is still shouted on the battlefield to this day. In the era Indomitus, the Imperial Guard has had more demanded of it than ever before. As Guilliman launched his Indomitus crusade to push back against the growing threat of chaos that was, in some cases literally, swallowing whole star systems, ties to the Imperial military drove already struggling worlds to the brink. Hive cities were emptied, valuable agri-worlds had to have their labor forces shipped off-world to fight, all in an attempt to provide the vanguard of the crusade with the bodies and the materials they needed to urgently fight back the rapid advance of chaos after the opening of the Great Rift that ripped the human-controlled section of the galaxy in two. In addition to the threat of chaos, Xenos aggressors such as Necrons and Eldari assaulted world after world and raided supply lines. Insurgents and heretics and genestealer cults fostered rebellion on worlds even within Terra's purview, and the Tyranids of High Fleet Leviathan assailed the Imperium from the opposite side of where the Crusade had concentrated most of its efforts. But through it all, the Imperial Guard has stood proudly against the enemies of humanity. With bayonet and laser and artillery, the near limitless men and women of the Astra Militarum have brought the wrath of the God Emperor to the heretic, Xenos, and everything in between as they live up to their moniker that is the Hammer of the Emperor. So with all that said, how does it all work? Let's start with joining up. Each planetary governor in the Imperium is responsible for the defense of their world. These defenses can take many forms, but regardless of how the defense is structured, most worlds will have to contribute at least 1/10 of their fighting forces, or more, depending on the circumstances, to send to the front lines across the war-ravaged galaxy. I guess a good allegory for this would be to think of planetary defense forces as like a national guard, while the Astra Militarum at large would be considered active duty army. Tithes for planets could be as little as a few thousand or significant as several million, depending on their population and proximity to active war zones, like we mentioned before. Recruitment methods vary from planet to planet, and many on factory worlds or hive worlds would flocked to their local regiment in hopes that they'd be able to join up and escape the brutality of their civilian lives. The Guard offers security, food, glory, and a lot more that would be a powerful draw to any desperate Imperial citizen. Each regiment is recognized by the name of their homeworld and a number, like the Cadian 144th, for example. Numbers are often recycled if the regiment is destroyed, allowing a new generation of soldiers to continue to carry on its traditions and legacy. When it comes to equipment, there's no real uniformity. Some regiments will go into battle fully decked out in combat armor. Others are going to try to Mad Max that shit with whatever they can piece together. Many regiments have copied the color and style of the Cadian shock troops, but there's no regulations in terms of battle dress. The only thing every single regiment has in common with equipment is that each troop is equipped with the famous las gun, the staple of the Imperial Guard armaments. The las gun, unlike the Astartes bolter, is cheap and easy to manufacture. It's incredibly powerful, accurate, reliable, and simple to maintain. Run out of ammo? Simply chuck your power pack into the fire for a few minutes, heat it up, and you're good to go. If local defense forces can't combat a threat, the Imperial Guard will be sent to aid them. En route to their combat zone, soldiers will be given specifics about the extent of the threat and what enemies they might face. Often, these regiments will already have a little bit of combat experience, but the training they receive on the way to their war zone will be tailored to the specific threats that they might face, equipment they might need to use, etc. Upon deployment, the Guard adheres to the Tactica Imperium, which outlines their combat doctrine, and it's pretty simple. Remember, throw enough bodies and firepower at an objective, and eventually you'll come out on top. Casualty rates can be as high as 100%, which, provided that those troops completed their goal more or less, is seen as very acceptable. Fresh meat is provided on a consistent basis, and commanders are more than happy to send wave after wave of regiments at the enemy and crush them with overwhelming numbers. Each regiment also complements one another, ensuring consistency of strength and that the deployed forces always have an answer to any challenge they might face. Should a company survive a campaign, the odds of returning home are slim. They'll quickly be shuttled to a new front line and often combined with other regiments to maintain a whole fighting force. If the regiment is depleted to the point that command considers it a waste of resources to rebuild, or if there are too few survivors to assimilate into another company, the remnants are often assigned to garrison duties on the world they've been fighting on in order to ensure continued protection of the local population and hold any ground gained. One important offshoot of the Guard that we should mention will be the Militarum auxilla, which is a subsection of the Imperial Guard made up of abhumans such as ogrins and ratlings. These near-humans are taught to hate themselves and their borderline heretical mutation, and that the only way to atone for such sins would be through fighting in service to the Emperor and the Imperium that was merciful enough to accept them, albeit begrudgingly, into the fold. But just like their regular human counterparts, the regiments of the Militarum auxilla have proven themselves worthy of the Emperor time and time again, and continue to be relied upon for completing specialty objectives. The command structure of the Astra Militarum is relatively straightforward. Each rank maintains a certain degree of responsibility, similar to military ranks in real life. I'll drop these here so you guys can read them, because quite honestly they're pretty cut and dry. But what I really want to touch on are the more specialist roles. Several individuals do or can hold a place within a regiment, but hold no official rank within the chain of command. These specialists usually possess a specific skill set needed for a mission, and while they have no real ranking power within the organization, they may be called upon or have the ability to take control of a Guard regiment to help them accomplish their own missions, or when the commanding officer has been slain. Such individuals include commissars, inquisitors, tech priests, priests of the ecclesiarchy, and the like. Lastly, as a cog in the Emperor's war machine, what's the relationship like between the Guard and the Space Marines? Most people will go their whole lives without seeing a Space Marine, and the Guard's no different. Tales of their conquests and abilities bring a sense of admiration and fear, and a rumor of these legendary warriors on a battlefield inspires hope and excitement among the ranks. The men and women of the Guard view the Astartes as gods among men, the holy sons of the Emperor sent out to bring his divine judgment to the mutant, Xenos, heretic. With the Guard being a melting pot of all sorts of different cultures, every guardsman has their own crazy beliefs about the Astartes. Still, one thing they all have in common is that it's considered the greatest moment of their lives if they get to fight alongside one of these epic symbols of hope and wrath. And that's all I've got for this one, y'all. Doing this video really has me wanting to start a Guard army, but I don't have the space, and I'd rather my wife not pull my spine out, so I think that'll have to go on hold for now. But that's how it all works, and that's how these everyday folks are the ones holding it all together out there on the front lines. But let me know your thoughts on the Guard down in the comments. Drop a like if you like it, a subscribe if you really liked it, and don't forget to check out my community tab to keep up to date with shenanigans and shitposts. I'll see you all in the next one. Toodles.